Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. It's race week yet again. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix awaits. Can Max Verstappen go for back-to-back race victories? That's certainly what Red Bull are hoping for, but 2 months on from Christian Horner's firing from the team, Helmut Marko says emphatically the decision was the correct one after that recent victory. The progress Red Bull feel like they are making, Laurent Mekies is, as far as Marko is concerned, the man for the job. Is this inevitable given all the drama that happened there behind the scenes? Is it critical to note the Horner wasn't doing a great job over the last couple of years, and does that mean his return to the grid some team or another could well be more challenging? Or is this classic Red Bull shenanigans? Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Plenty to get into today. This is the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Well, of course, there are several, a couple of famous corners at this track. This is one of them. And this weekend, we are back to the C6 compound of tyre. Now, this is going to be very interesting. We've seen it used a few times this season. Pretty much every time that we have seen the C6 be used, it's not been the fastest tyre in qualifying. The teams would prefer to use the C5. They would likely make that the faster tyre, but they've often not wanted to use it up because it could well be an excellent race tyre instead. We'll see what happens, right? But the C6 is back. It means that the softest compounds are emerging to Baku. Obviously not much tyre degradation when you're just driving in a straight line. Charles Leclerc has been an absolute monster here historically. That is unlikely to change this weekend, but the Ferrari may be unable to deliver anything of serious value. That's certainly been the case so far this season. It will be interesting to see whether any teams do go for the C5 in qualifying, whether that becomes very relevant, whether Red Bull's prowess in a straight line they showed at Monza or around that particular circuit can be replicated here at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and they can give Max Verstappen and maybe even Tsunoda, certainly when it comes to trying to score some decent points, a chance to do some serious damage. But it's nice to see the softest compounds on offer. It means it's more likely we get more stops and a more interesting Grand Prix. It shouldn't mean that the tyre is more likely to, let's say, deconstruct, because around a circuit like Baku, that can cause some issues we've seen in the past. Now, 1 year today is the Madring Grand Prix. So this will actually fall right at the end of the European stint next year, because it's obviously going to take some time to get it ready. Pretty funny, they put this image together with what the crowds are going to look like, how spectacular it's all going to be. But actually, there were some crowds gathering in Madrid yesterday protesting the existence of this Grand Prix. Now, I'm not a fan of the Madrid Grand Prix because I'm kind of biased, I will admit. I like Barcelona, I think it's a great track. Many would disagree, but I want it to stay. It looks like Madrid is going to replace it, so okay, if you're going to replace the Spanish Grand Prix with another Spanish Grand Prix, there's plenty of circuits to choose from, right? Like, Spain has plenty of Grade 1 listed circuits, hasn't over the last few years, but instead we're going to go to Madrid and make a street track, which is totally unnecessary. And again, I think it's the same as to what happened in Valencia, where you can look at some government corruption, you can look at where the money here is really going to end up, and you can try and figure out why they might want to do a race like this. The other thing, which I think is also fair, is that for the locals, if you move next to an F1 circuit and then you complain that it's noisy, that's on you, right? But if the council decides that you are going to get a street race running through your back garden, as it were, you are within your rights, I think, to complain. And there was actually a protest on yesterday on the streets of Madrid, and we'll see some footage of it in a second. Stop Formula 1 Madrid. The city council confirms the race will be held on actually it's the 13th of September, but a couple of days ago next year. They've taken this platform to denounce the noise, the environmental impact, and the public cost. So, it's classic stuff, but it is nonetheless interesting, right? Have a look at this footage right here from Madrid. Here come all the fans, but not there to... Of course, it's not like there's a huge crowd, precisely, but there's a little bit of a disturbance, let's say, being made here with these signs, and of course it's going to do nothing, right? Like, we know what the conclusion here is going to be. Money is going to talk, and this race is going to happen in the car park in Madrid, as we believe it's going to be, going across a couple of roundabouts. But equally, it's interesting to see that this race has some serious pushback for now, and protesters are taking to the streets as they get ready to build what is certainly going to be one of the circuits in the history of Formula 1. Few other things to mention as well. Fernando Alonso's talking about Adrian Newey and the prospect of Aston Martin next year. Can they be a serious title contender? Alonso says Newey seems in control of everything all the time. He's got a self-confidence that I've never seen before. He is not stressed about any other team. He believes that his car will be the best. So, quite the same as this should not come as a massive surprise. Newey is likely to deliver aerodynamically something pretty damn good. It may not be the best, it's not like Newey is totally infallible, but I think it's inevitable he will have at least come up with some ideas that nobody else has thought of. So we'll see what the car looks like aerodynamically, but of course next year aero is only half of the battle, and maybe it's not even that. The power unit is probably going to end up next year being the most important thing. Mercedes, we think, are maybe leading the way, maybe Ferrari are in the mix, but some concerns about reliability. That's true of Red Bull as well. Honda, we are like totally in the dark right now. The only thing we do know is that they will have Aramco fuels, and there is reason to believe that Aramco will be in a pretty good spot fuel-wise next year. They've been around that kind of e-fuel technology now for a long time. They've obviously partnered closely with F1 for a long time as well. So I think there's reason to believe that in the Aston Martin project next season, the Newey angle, the fuel angle, that looks pretty good. The quality of the simulators, Newey even said, is bad, and their simulators don't work, basically, right now. That's a problem, so they will have to rely on Newey doing the simulations in his head, so that has limitations. And then the Honda power unit, who knows, right? So that's the story with Aston Martin as we understand it, but they're not a team to discount next season. I think there will be elements next year where they may be the strongest, but they may not quite have a full package for Alonso to try and give it a go to win his third world title. Even as Piastri says, I think he's definitely a driver where the stats don't tell the full story of his career. Definitely one of the best drivers that the sport has ever seen. Now, speaking of Oscar Piastri, he also said a few words on the situation in Monza. Now, this is what Piquet Jr. had to say about it, and I don't disagree with this assessment, really. That had we been further into the season, this decision would probably not have been made. Piastri would have done what Rosberg suggested in his podcast afterwards and said, "Oh, excuse me, you're cutting out," right? And then he would have finished the Grand Prix and said he didn't hear what they had to say. So, Piquet Jr. says he didn't need to give the position back because of a team error. Obviously, he's going to regret this a lot if he loses the championship by less than 3 points, which, yeah, I think in hindsight he would. Do I think that's going to happen? No, I think that Piastri will still win the title. Obviously, he's currently the favourite, but it's not impossible that he loses the championship by a small margin. Of course, it was a 6-point swing, right? It would have been 37-point lead in the championship. Instead, it's actually only 31. So in the grand scheme of things, it could be a big deal. Piastri said, "I want to protect the team first policy because I can't have my own success without the team having success," which, maybe there's some truth to that. Look, do I think that Piastri is actually just a soft puppet? No, I actually think he's been quite tactical. I'm inclined to believe that Norris might just be he's kind of the golden boy, but also, he could be a bit of a puppet, even though Norris really didn't want to give up the win last year in Hungary. He did do it, but he really didn't want to. And, any driver who gives up positions willingly without fighting it at all loses a bit of respect for me. At least Piastri came on the radio and said, "I don't want to do this, but because I don't think it's right. You told me that pit stops were this," and he did it anyway, and I get why he did it, but I don't think that Piastri will echo this statement if Abu Dhabi comes around, the title is on the line, and the team asks him to do something that he doesn't want to do in terms of championship position, right? I do believe that Piastri is a real racer at heart, but we'll see, right? He can say what he wants publicly for now to defend the team, but when push comes to shove, I think that individual selfishness will, as it should, take over. At the end of the day, these guys are going to war for a championship. Now, Piastri has scored points in 42 consecutive races. Hamilton holds the record at 48. Verstappen is up at 43. Piastri, if he finishes this season without a DNF or without finishing outside of the points, it could have happened in Australia, of course, but he fought his way back in, as we know. He could well break this record, and yeah, the reliability on Piastri's side has been exceptional over the last couple of years, as it has been for most cars, to be fair, but obviously Lando got very unlucky in Zandvoort with what unfolded a couple of weeks ago. A couple of quick things on Ferrari. We've talked about the progress of their car for next year. They've redefined the chassis, they've redefined the suspension, they're still working on aero developments. Their car is about 70% ready for next season, and according to reports, we discussed this yesterday, but it is going to be an extremely aggressive concept. They're making an aggressive engine package. They're going to package with some slimmer side pods, with some, lesser cooling than other teams might well go for. And, well, here we go again, right? Ferrari optimistic, but they're taking some risk with the intention to be back at the top next season. It is actually quite embarrassing at what Ferrari have done in this rule cycle. To go from starting 2022 with the best car, I still think that the Red Bull was the best car at the start of 2022. It was just very heavy, and once they got rid of the weight, that Red Bull I think was always going to be the strongest car, just because from a suspension perspective, Newey had just designed a superior concept, I think. But the Ferrari F175 was very good at the start of that season, as we know. People love to talk about the technical directive that came in and changed things, but I think the reality was that Ferrari were trending in the wrong direction that season, and Red Bull were trending in the right direction. But from Ferrari to go from where they were, people thought after that 1-2 in Bahrain that, wow, Ferrari are back. This is their year. The championship is, almost signed, sealed and delivered. But of course, that was not at all true. And a few years on, in the final year of the regulations, they're basically nowhere compared to a lot of their top rivals. And that's even the discussion now, that when Ferrari turn up to every weekends, if McLaren don't win, they are not the team that's able to capitalise. It was Mercedes in Canada, and it's been Max on a few occasions as well. But Ferrari have not been able to do so. Even if they're second fastest, McLaren don't work. It's a little bit like what happened in 2023 when the McLaren got much better, but it had characteristics which were not dissimilar to the RB19, but just the RB19 was better. So whenever whenever they turn up on any given weekends, the McLaren might be really good, but if they were really good, the McLaren was just better. And I don't know if they'd, or the Red Bull was just better. Nowadays, it kind of feels a little bit like that with the Ferrari, even sometimes where they're okay, the McLaren is just stronger. But it's not like the SF25 has any real strong point, as the article from Auto Racer suggests. At least the SF23 was rapid on the straight and good in qualifying. The SF24 was a good race car, and also the best in slower corners. The F175 was as well, with incredible traction. The SF25 has none of that. Like, it's fine, technically, compared to the rest of the grid, but it has no advantages over any of the other cars. So it is one of the worst cars that Ferrari have built in a rather long time, and this year's Red Bull would also probably fall into that category, apart from the fact that on certain weekends, the RB21 is capable, in Max Verstappen's hands, of doing some pretty special things. And they're confident, who knows, maybe Max can go 10 for 10 in the final 10 races of the season. Incredibly unlikely. And whenever Helmut Marko, a race weekend happens, Max wins. And Marko's like, oh, we're back. We're back. The confidence is back in the building. The spirit is high. Anything is possible. We can win in Baku. We can even win in Singapore. So Marko is, he's talking a strong game. I don't really believe him yet. But they went on to say, this feels like a rebirth for us. We are all overjoyed. The atmosphere is fantastic. The Red Bull spirit is back. So all it took is one win in Monza, and now Red Bull are back apparently. But it is relevant, this, right? Because this is the first win under the leadership of Laurent Mekies, and Horner got fired, I think it was the 9th of July, a couple of months ago now. Horner was gone, and initially they felt like they were kind of finding their footing a little bit. Mekies came in and made some changes. Definitely Yuki got a bit more support, I think, than he otherwise might have done. There were rumours that the way that they were approaching their simulations, the way that they were approaching the race weekends, was given a new lens with Horner's departure. Now look, this isn't to take away from what Horner achieved over the last couple of decades, because it's undeniable that his approach of being the figurehead of that team and picking and choosing and building the team in his own image effectively was incredibly successful for what Red Bull managed, given their, let's say, expectations when Red Bull first came in and the way that they were perceived to what they achieved under Horner. You're not going to be able to take that away from him. But over the last couple of years, there has been talk about, was Horner thinking about a prize beyond the motorsport team? Was he looking, for his own ambition and for his own potential to maybe spin off Red Bull Racing as part of his own entity, take on some ownership with the backing of the Thai family that own it, the Yavidya family, in a similar way to the fact that Toto Wolff's got ownership with Mercedes? There was a few pieces, let's say when Dietrich Mateschitz passed away, that Horner was striving for more power in that organisation, maybe at a higher level, that he was focused on making the best out of his own organisation that he was there to manage. That seemingly is the way that some of the Austrians view it, but also Horner might say, well, those Austrians were also very much vying for power and control, and if I didn't also do the same thing and take a similar approach in terms of this Red Bull civil war, then I would have been ousted regardless. Eventually he was, and I think that was coming for some time. The question has been, looking back on the last 2 months, has this been the right decision? Have Red Bull done the right thing? Laurent Mekies says that Max is so integral to their development. He's putting so much into the projects. He's testing the car. He's working with the engineers on both sides of the fence. Max is, being a model professional and living and breathing racing as we know that he does. But I thought the most interesting comment was this from Helmut Marko, who said that getting rid of Horner for Mekies was the right decision, as teams need a technician at the top. Now, this is a relatively recent development, and I think that in due course this may change back around, but we've seen with the likes of Andrea Stella, Mike Crack, for example, over at Aston Martin, among others, putting more technical people in charge of the Formula One projects, people that typically would not be considered to have the necessary charisma, the necessary leadership characteristics to charge a team up to the top. But there is a feeling that having someone who really understands the intricacies of the engineering and the technical components can be very valuable. I think even Marko said the other day, or maybe it was Verstappen who said, that Mekies, he asks the right questions when there are issues with the car. He knows the questions to ask because he comes from an engineering background, unlike, let's say, a Christian Horner. Now, obviously, Horner has other characteristics as a leader, for good or for bad, but there are reasons why Marko says, I think it was the right decision. In the complexity of Formula One, a technician at the top is probably the better solution. Everything is then built more from the technical side. I believe that with the speed we showed, we would be at the front of almost all circuits, hopefully under our own steam. It works because the whole team works together optimally. The drivers are involved in the setup, and we can now make optimal use of the potential. So I thought that was a pretty interesting assessment. He did go on to say in the line after this, the World Championship is out of reach, which it is, but I think Marko is basically saying that Horner was holding us back in all of these regards, right? Having got rid of him, the team is now better put together, top to bottom. The driver's feedback is getting listened to more. Max's opinions on setup are getting treated with more respect. Yuki's opinions maybe are getting held in higher esteem as well. And, maybe he's right to suggest that after 20 odd years with Horner in charge, and it's not like Marko didn't want him to go. Sure, on some level, Marko and Horner were probably kind of friendly at a time, but there was no doubt that it felt like there was some level of rivalry or animosity there internally at the team. And Marko, given his relationships with the Austrian side of Red Bull, was probably always going to win that power struggle. And now that it's happened, and now that they've won the Grand Prix in Monza, people are now looking and saying, there you go. Maybe that is the evidence that we needed, that getting rid of Horner was absolutely the correct decision. I do think it's interesting for the upcoming years because Mattia Binotto, right, he's now leading the show at Audi, and he also comes from a more technical background. When he was over at Ferrari as well, there was some evidence to suggest that. Did he do a great job at Ferrari? No, clearly not. It's not like putting an engineer in charge is always the correct solution, but it has been one of the preferences of teams over the last few years, and it may mean that when Christian Horner is looking to come back, which I imagine that he will at some point, and is getting interest from other teams, are those teams going to say, well, Red Bull, they got better after you left, right? Or are they going to say, well, we kind of like having an engineer in charge? There are some positives to that. So I think it's interesting in terms of the landscape of F1. The reality is that Christian Horner's success is still pretty undeniable, and if he wants to make a return, at some point there will be a team that says, you know what, let's put you in charge of the program, especially because at the start of 2026, more than likely, some of these teams are going to be floundering. But very much interested to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.